Welcome to Masters and Volts, the Business of Politics, a weekly podcast in which we bring you guests who work in the field of electing candidates to political office and influencing lawmakers. Whether we like it or not, politics is a business. It takes people, money, and organization to win elections and shape public policy. I'm Merrick Masters, here with my co-host Bill Votes today, and our guest is Susy Avery, who will speak to her role in the business of politics. Bill, I'll turn things over to you to introduce Susy and also to start the questioning.
Thank you, Merrick. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Susy. Our guest today is Susy Avery, and it's a very distinguished bio. Chair of the Michigan Republican Party in the mid-1990s, from there to be a candidate against the incumbent, David Bonnier, a United States congressman, and Governor Engler's director of Southeast Michigan office, appointed by Governor Engler as director of the newly created State Tourism Agency, a huge industry in Michigan, Travel Michigan. Then Governor Engler appointed her director of public affairs. Governor Snyder appointed her executive director of the Women's Commission, where she served through 2016, then became director of the Michigan Public Political Leadership Program at Michigan State University. Just a career dotted by service on a number of boards, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, the Southeast Michigan Transportation Authority, and many others. She served on the Wayne County Commission, elected trustee, clerk, and then supervisor of Northville. Susy, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And as you can tell from my bio, I find it very difficult to keep a job for very long. Apparently, I go through many of them.
Hey, they should be so lucky. So I thought we would begin with just to have the audience give a sense of your political journey that brought you to being chair of the Michigan Republican Party. What got you there?
It's my father who later in his life was the mayor of Mount Clemens, but back in the day, he heard a guy who was giving a political speech who was in Mount Clemens at the time. And my father liked him so much that he wanted to make a contribution to his campaign, but we didn't have very much money at the time. So instead of sending him anything financially, he donated me to his campaign. And that's how I became what was called a Romney girl at that time. It was George Romney. And we were like his little cheerleaders. It sounds very politically incorrect today, but we had these white shirts and blue sashes and we would go to his speeches and, spur up the audience and all this kind of stuff. And to this day, I can actually recite some of Romney's speeches because he just gave a terrific speech, but he gave it over and over again. So I remember a lot of that. But at that point in my life is how I connected with George Romney. This is George Romney, this is Mitt Romney's father. Okay, and that's how, and to be quite blunt about it, George Romney did follow me throughout my career until he died. I did hear from him at various points. But then after I was married and we moved to Northville Township, for a short period of time, I worked for Mayor Dick Lugar. He was the mayor of Indianapolis at that time. He hadn't become a senator yet. And we worked on something called Unigov, which you political scientists will remember that we made the whole county of Marion into the city of Indianapolis. Kind of an interesting stories. But then when my then husband was transferred from General Motors up to the proving grounds, we moved to Northville Township. And the homeowners association came to me and they said, this is a long story. I swear it's going to end quickly. But they came and they said, you know so much about politics, having working for Dick Lugar and stuff. We would like you to try to pass a local ordinance that we would like. And I said, okay, what would that? Oh, I'll do that, because it was a little township, little board. And they said it was a pooper scooper ordinance. Now, pooper scooper, for those of you who do not have animals, is an ordinance where you go around and pick up the poop from your animals if you're walking them around your neighborhood. Apparently, people were having a lot of trouble with that. I didn't have an animal, but there you go. If you know about township government, it has 2 or 3 readings. You have to publish it twice. So for about, I would say, a good 6, 7 months, I was sitting in the audience every single township meeting because it was always on their agenda. And I always had to say, our homeowners association, we would really this, blah, blah. It almost got passed when one of the township trustees was then relocated out to California. He worked for Ford Motor Company, and they had to appoint somebody who was in the same political party as he was. And they had this long conversation about this at an open meeting. Now you have to remember, Northville Township at the time was fairly little. I think the budget was maybe a little over 1.5 million. It wasn't that big of a place. But they said, we have to have somebody who has really sat through all the budget meetings. Suddenly they recalled the only person who had sat through all the budget hearings was the pooper scooper lady. And this would never happen today, but I was actually then appointed from the audience, of which I was the only person, except the chief of police, if I remember, up to the podium to become a member. They swore me in that night. I became a trustee. Then, of course, I didn't like the clerk, what she was doing, so I ran for clerk and won that. And then the supervisor ran for judge and did that and made that. So then I ran for supervisor and won that. And then in the middle of my term, then I did run for Wayne County Commission, basically on a bet, because a friend of mine bet that no Republican could ever be elected to the Wayne County Board of Commission. And knowing what I know now, I should have never taken this bet. I had no demographic. All I knew was the issues. And so then I was elected to the Northville Township, to the Wayne County Board of Commissioners, where I was the only Republican. I had a very interesting tour. And in the middle of that was when Engler was elected. And then Engler asked me to go and work for him. So I quit that job to go. So that's how I've gone through so many elected positions in a short period of time. But I got to tell you, the best thing I probably ever did was to be a township official, because you learn local things that help you later in state government and in county government.
What characteristics are central to a person being a successful chair of a state political party? Why did they pick you? How did you, what's the key? What makes the difference?
I think for me, of course, Engler was the person who came to me and said he wanted me to be head of the party. And I said, I've been involved with the party for a long time, but he said, no, we just need someone who understands. In the political world, and Mark Brewer might be telling you the same thing. In the political world, there are certain people who get politics, and there's certain people who just are there to talk and talk about an issue, or to talk about being mad or whatever, or it's like a social club to them. But there's certain people who actually do get politics, and Engler had an eye for those kind of people and the positions that they should have. Very interesting to see some of the people that he brought into his kind of realm. And when I was on the Wayne County Board of Commissioners, he actually would come down, and he put me on a couple of state commissions where he was head of the Senate at the time that required a Republican. So he became aware of me in the past. It's always good to have a mentor who is helping you when you're head of state party, because no one ever thinks you're doing a really good job. This is both sides of the aisle. Everybody has complaints about it. So it's nice if you have at least 1 or 2 people outside of your family who think that you're doing okay. The other thing is you have to be a certain kind of workaholic. I don't know if I could be the state party today like I was back then. It was 24/7. I was divorced at that time, so I had a lot of time, and it was 24/7, because things happen all the time, and we didn't have the biggest social media that is out there now. So it requires a lot of time and effort and political kind of savvy to be able to do the job, I think.
And how does someone, in this case, Governor Engler, how do they spot you? How do they spot? There has to be a number of people that are putting in the mega hours, just love politics. Is there a special trait Is there a capacity to listen, capacity to lead, capacity to organize that you think is central to a person being successful as a state party chair?
I'll tell you one thing. I did become, because I represent Northville Township, and then when I was a county commissioner, I represented Livonia, the two Northvilles, Canton, that whole area. But even before that, I became friends with Ed McNamara, and Ed McNamara was then the mayor of Livonia. And he and I and another Democrat from downriver, Dewey Henry, and another supervisor from Plymouth Township, his name is Maury Bree, who is since deceased. They're all deceased except for me. We used to meet for lunch about once a month and pass around ideas and things. And we just became our own little bipartisan kind of thing. So that, in terms of me being the only Republican, and in Wayne County at that time, there wasn't that many Republicans. There was some elected officials, I should say. There was Republicans, but because we had a supervisor in Canton, a supervisor in Plymouth Township, and we had some over in the Grosse Pointe areas. But basically, I was it. So whenever anything came, if we had a presidential visit with Bush coming in, if we had anybody to meet at the airport, I was the one they called because I was the highest ranking elected official in Wayne County. That's just what happened. There's a thing in golf saying, the more you practice, the luckier you get. And I think it was just because I had been around for such a long time and knew a lot of people, bipartisan people, that I could get involved in issues that most Republicans or most Democrats might want to stay away from. But because I went to Arab American functions, I went to Latino Hispanic functions, Jewish functions, I just did a lot of stuff.
Merrick, back to you.
Susie, we want to talk a little bit about the nature of the job of being chair of the Republican Party. And you indicated that it was a 24/7 job. We'd like for you to tell us a little bit about that job, the kinds of things you did, what were the most important things you worked on, and what maybe an average work week looked like for you.
That's such an interesting question, just because the work weeks changed a lot. First of all, and I'm assuming the Democrats did it the same way. You choose your team. You have to choose a team. And usually your team, you have a financial person that does, because you get a lot of questions and donations that have to be answered by someone who understands internally what they can accept and not accept from PACs, from individuals, from if someone, anyway. And then you have to have someone who is your political director. Then you have to have someone who helps with your financial, just actually raising the money. Then you divide up the state and you have people, like I had a guy represent Northern Michigan, up the Upper Peninsula. You divide them up into like congressional districts almost. And then after you develop your team, then you go on to, okay, now you have to make your strategic plan. Okay, what is your plan? And the plan usually is what that party wants to accomplish in terms of politics. It usually does not have something to do with a lot of things that you hear about, but it does include electing Republicans. No matter if they're pro-life, pro-choice, pro-this, pro-that, your job is to elect Republicans. And because of that, you set up all these different committees. You have women committees that do you have women groups that do certain things. You establish some, and a lot of things of what you do is you go around the state to try to inspire people and say, okay, now what would it take to have a Republican win this? And of course, it's, as Saul Anousis, another former chair, has said, about 80% of your time is spent in fundraising. And the reason that is state parties need money. And that's true for the Republican Party, for libertarians, or whoever, the Jill Stein's party, because you have to have the financial resources for a lot of stuff, for phone banks, for being able to pay rent, to being able to set up where the signs can be collected, especially in terms of being able to pay your people to stay with the Republican, with your state Republican Party during election cycles, because once the election cycle ends, they all get hired out by candidates who've won or something like that. So you just want to make sure you can keep stability in place. And also, I think it's important that people know that they can reach the chair. And there's always a vice chair. And now in the Republican Party, it used to be they had to be a different sex than the chair. We didn't pay them. Now they pay them, but now we didn't back then. But they can at least get sound off. They can have their views known. Now, it might be that maybe they just don't think anybody's listening at their local level, but that's why you go around and go to all the local meetings if you can. You try to hit all the districts, and that's why it's a 24/7 job.
Susie, a little bit more about that. When you said that you spend 80% of your time fundraising, when I think of a party chair of whether it's the Republican or Democratic Party chair, or even at the national level, I think this is the spokesperson of the party in the region that they cover. And that's an externally related function of the job. But what I hear you saying is that there's also an internal part of the job. How important is it in being a good chair? Is it to be a good manager, picking the right people so that you can do the kinds of things that you really want to do and need to do, go out and raise money and make certain that you are the public face, if you will, of the party going to all these meetings?
No, you're right about that, because the public perception is you spend 80% of your time being on television or answering questions or being on the national news or something. And that's part of the job, because you have to be available for anything. And by the way, you have to be available on the fly. People will call you about something that happened. Reporters will call about something that happened 10 minutes ago at a Trump rally or at a Harris rally or something. You have to have enough knowledge to be able to do that. And also, another thing I should have mentioned was when I was chair, I ran one of the Mackinac conferences, which was a big deal back then for the Michigan Republican Party. We used to run these Mackinac conferences. And Haley Barber, I got to know Haley Barber quite well from Yazoo, Mississippi, who was head of the RNC at the time. And he always had the best thing was, when in doubt, say nothing and just listen to them for a while. And then if it's not a question you can answer, go ahead and say, that's an interesting question. Let me get back to you. So you don't, but the fundraising part of it and doing that really is how you are judged if you are successful or not. We had a recent chair of the Michigan Republican Party who almost bankrupted, and because she just didn't do fundraising. And because of that, they mounted an effort which was successful to remove her as chair, and now we have a new chair. But because that is how you are judged in terms of the people who are on your team, it is really meaningful, like you say, to pick the right people who you trust. I really was not in the office area really that much. I was on the road, because for large fundraisers, we used to have something which I don't even know if they have anymore, but a large fundraiser would be somebody who gave you 25,000 or more. You would go see these people face to face. You didn't just write a letter or call them on the phone. You set up a time for them in their office, and you went to wherever their office was located. And you said, here's what we are doing. We want you still to have trust in us. We want you to know that this is a strategic plan. A lot of people who give a lot of money are very interested in strategic planning, because that's what they have for their business in order how they got their wealth. So they want to know about that strategic plan. Where are you in the plan, and how is this going? And so because of that, that is a lot of time was spent for me actually in the car. But I got to tell you, I always liked it because they gave me a car. The Republican Party gave me a car.
Well, one last thing in this general realm of the nature of the job, you mentioned that it helped to have a mentor, somebody who could support you, because In those kinds of positions, you're always subject to criticism. And I guess nobody's ever really satisfied, and you can't please everybody. But who was your ultimate boss? I know you have bylaws about how you get elected and that kind of thing to chair, but was it the donors? Was it the governor? Did you feel that if you knew you dissatisfied this group, that you were on tenuous ground?
It was Governor John Engler. He's the one that brought me to the party. But I'll tell you, the interesting thing about John Engler, which I might have mentioned to Bill before, was he didn't do any polls. Now, other people did polling about him, but he never authorized a single poll about him. Now, when I was chair, it was a big time, which you guys might remember, in Detroit when they had something on the ballot about gambling. We didn't have the casinos back then. They had to pass by. It had to be on the ballot. People had to vote for it. And I had a lot of donors, big donors, call me and say, I want you to tell Engler, this is how I feel about gambling or these casinos, and some were for, some were against. So I made an appointment to see the governor and in his office, and I went in and I said, I just want to tell you that some big donors have been calling me, and they wanted to share their opinions about this whole gambling thing. And Engler said, I don't want to hear it. And I said, yeah, but these are our big donors. And he said, no, but I don't want to hear it. And I go, why? He said, because I have my own opinion and I'm the governor. And if they don't like it, they can vote me out of office. That's exactly how he felt. He did not ever. That's why we probably will never have a governor like him. He just did not. I know you just would not hear things like that today, because they said they tried, and we had something we used to call clips. And clips are somebody in the office, usually an intern, would tear out articles and put them and make copies of them, and important articles that were heavy, because you can't read every newspaper every day. You can't read the Free Press News, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and just put relevant kind of things together. And very seldom did he read clips, because a lot of it he actually heard from talking to people or reading on his own. He had 1,000 books, but he was committed to what he believed in. And that's how he ran the government for 12 years, which is amazing.
Yeah. Bill, I'm going to turn things over to you. Thanks, Susie, very much for that. Very insightful about the nature of the job. Bill?
Susie, you talked about the importance of the strategic plan. And when you were chair of the Michigan Republican Party, what were the central challenges that the party faced, that perhaps the governor faced? What were the central goals in that strategic plan?
A lot of it was based on get out the vote. We had certain policy issues that we would help support and help candidates, but we found, and it's interesting to me that this year in this political structure with the two presidential candidates, that both political parties are now involved in get out the votes. But the get out the vote effort was extremely important, because back then it wasn't, Democrats always won certain things. They always won for the Attorney General, Frank Kelly, who was then they always tried to win for Secretary of State. Blanchard had been the governor back then, and we knew if we could just energize that get out the vote. But how do you energize get out the vote? Now, I have to say, in this presidential election cycle, Trump has been very energizing, but we didn't have a Trump back then. So how do you do it? So what we decided to do was to set up these county parties to make them a lot stronger than they had been in the past, and county Republican parties, and to have a chair, a vice chair, but have these people actually be really engaged in what they did and get people to walk. Because the one thing I keep saying, even this year, was when I was state party chair, I did a poll. Engler didn't do polls, but I did a poll. And the poll was, who would you vote for if you took away Democrats, the labels, Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, natural law, etc. And you also took away things like, are they white people? Are they black people? Are they Asian people? Are they whatever? Just took away everything. Who would you vote for? The number one reason that came back of who you would vote for is you had met them. You had met them. The second biggest reason, and that's why door to door is so important, but the second reason is if you had known somebody who had met them. And that's why these rallies on both sides of the aisle that are going on right now are so important to these candidates, because maybe I didn't go to a rally, but I knew somebody who went to a rally. And if that was good enough for them, that's good enough for me. And that is still why rallies, people say, oh, rallies, yeah, but door to door and rallies are important. And this door to door stuff that the Republicans are doing right now is phenomenal. I've never seen an effort like this ever, that they are going door to door. And they're not only just going to, we all have these walking lists that you can buy of Republicans and Democrats. You can buy the list and you can know in the House usually if they're, because in Michigan, in order to get a ballot in a primary for a presidential, you have to declare if you're Republican or Democrat. So they know obviously which house. But what they're doing right now is they're going around to people who have identified as Republican, but maybe haven't been out to vote for 10 years or something like that. They're actually going out. And what they're finding is this is helping not only the top of the ticket, but those people on the lower level also. I don't mean to say they have lower level things, but House candidates, for instance, county commission candidates. It's just because somebody made the effort to come to their house. It sounds crazy, but it's actually true. Someone had made that effort. They can call you on the phone as a robocall. They can mail you 15 things, which you're going to get anyway. To be honest, you're going to see Trump signs, Harris signs. You're going to see all this kind of stuff, but really signs do not vote. That's amazing, but signs do not vote. But the biggest thing is if you had met this person, and that is why when I was chair, at least, that this was a big deal for me after I saw the results of that poll. MRG actually did the poll for me, and it was a lesson in, okay, we have to stop this highfalutin stuff and think we're going to win on all these issues and taxation and everything that was going on at that time. Actually, what we needed a more personal relationship with a voter. Even if they didn't agree with you. Even if we said John Dingell could run for anything when he was alive and he would have won, because you know what? He went to everything. He went to everything across the state. I mean, he went to all the veteran stuff. He went to everything. And people knew John England and they would vote for him.
You know what? If a central success of your term as chair of the Michigan Republican Party was strengthening the organizations in the counties, is there oh darn, something that didn't quite work? Something that, in retrospect, was just, maybe it was impossible to succeed there, but, and I don't want to use the word failure, but was there something that I wish we could have been more successful on that thing?
Yeah, I wish we could have been more successful in terms of what they have had a big success in now, which is just the communication aspect between people who disagreed. We had a lot of people within the party who were one way or the other. We had a lot of pro-choice Republicans. We had a lot of people like that. But what we should have done, and I tried to do, but I don't think I did it as effective as I could, is focus on the issue. Just get away from what the media thinks the issue is, which was back then, it was still the abortions. That was a big deal. But focus on issues like the taxation issue that everybody could agree on, and focus on those issues versus, because when push comes to shove, the biggest thing that is going to happen is if they trust that you are going to stick with what you're talking about. And when they see, okay, we have some people in our party who are doing this, some people are doing that, and they go, I don't really like what so-and-so is doing. But you have to say, we have a big tent, so they're all going to be involved in it. Also, that was a time when character mattered, I said. And I had to defend some people that were not of the highest character. But I had to say, the Republicans and Democrats at the same time, because we used to kid each other. Basil Brown fighting on the floor and Gilda Mello having all of these and crazy kind of stuff like that. So we both had our issues with those. And those are internal issues that I think both parties just struggled with.
Interesting. Merrick, back to you.
Susie, we want to close the questions with one that asked you to talk a little bit about how you think the Republican Party today is, and you've already alluded to this a little bit, is positioned for the 2024 elections. You can focus on the presidential, but I know that'll trickle down to the down ballot candidates at the congressional level and also at the state and local level. But how do you think the party is positioned? We're on the cusp of the election. We're today less than 3 weeks away from the November 5th election. How do you think the party is positioned to win important races like the presidential race, the senatorial race between Rogers and Slotkin?
I think if it was based on enthusiasm, which a lot of times get out the vote is based on enthusiasm, I think I have never seen any presidential candidate who's been able to hold that enthusiasm after he lost, like Trump. In other words, we don't see a holdover for Hillary Clinton, who we ran against a lot. That just didn't stay there. Even Biden, there wasn't that enthusiasm. For some reason, and there's a lot of reasons, I shouldn't say for some reason, there's a lot of reasons why that enthusiasm stayed. Enthusiasm is a central part of trying to get people to come out and vote for your candidate. We weren't really considered a purple state. This whole thing about Michigan being a swing state is new to many people, just because we didn't have a candidate who could hold that enthusiastic group, and mainly with people who hadn't been involved in politics in maybe ever, but a lot of people who hadn't voted before in certain races, a lot of people who never voted absentee or never showed up at the polls. It's an interesting, from a political science point of view, it's an interesting race that I have been trying to study about how this came about. And I go back to the late 1980s when I believe a lot of this started when they bailed out the banks, but a lot of people lost their houses, and that because of foreclosures, etc. And that propelled a lot of people to get more interested in politics, because that was something that was done on the national level to bail out these banks. And because I heard a lot of it at a business that we own, guys sitting around the table just griping about it and saying it, and it affected them personally, because a lot of them had homes that might have been in foreclosure at the time. So it affected, so they suddenly got interested in politics. This had not happened before, unless there was, usually people will vote if they're mad about something. They don't like their local tax, they don't like abortion, they don't like this, they don't like that. But this was an overwhelming thing that got people more involved in politics that had not been involved in, it was what we used to call barroom talk, barroom bragging. What are those guys talking about after, when they go for a couple beers after I knew, because I was going to those bars when I was chair, because just to hear them. And I'd say, what do you know about Republicans? What do you know about this and that? I never got the enthusiasm that the Republican Party today is receiving. And I know the Democrats are, this is such an interesting race, just because the Democrats have someone who never won a primary vote for president. So how this all affects everything is very interesting to people like me who try to study the trends. And there is no trend. There's no trend, because she just never, and she's had to get in a lot of her issues quickly, which is usually very difficult. And because, as I said, the enthusiasm on that side of the aisle is just not the same, except they're against Trump. That's their biggest thing, they're against Trump. But they really can't hook onto like an issue that they really want to push. And where Republicans are going, oh, look at immigration, the economy, how much does a pound of hamburger cost? No taxes on Social Security, things like that. So it's going to be a race even, and here's my prediction. Are you guys ready? I know you're both political scientists.
We're ready.
All right, here's my prediction. My prediction is we are not going to know the result of the 2024 presidential election for at least a month after the election.
No.
Yes, and I told a reporter recently it was his job security. And by the way, that's probably you guys' security also, because you can just go do another podcast on. But with the way things, and right now they're having a terrible time just trying to figure out how people in parts of Florida can even vote. These hurricanes have wiped out precincts, have wiped out. And how do you, and even as you go up the East Coast, there's some areas that have just been devastated. Those people can't vote. We don't have internet voting, okay? So you have to you have to be able to drop your ballot off somewhere. And with all this devastation, so I think there's going to, and there's a problem, apparently it's just popped up with military ballots. I'm sorry, and I'm sorry to have to say it, but I do think, and you guys can prove me wrong, you'll probably save the tape, but I think it's going to be quite a while before we know the final result.
I think that could very well end up being the case. As close as it is, they're going to insist on counting every ballot. And I know both parties are lined up for that kind of battle and ready. And with the mail-in balloting, I saw a poll today that said that 47% of the people plan on voting early. And that is either through absentee or just early voting showing up. And that means that all those votes are going to have to be counted. It may make 2020 look pretty tame.
And the problem is our Secretary of State we have now is issuing new rules before too close to an election. I hate to say it that way, but she's having some rules that the clerks are mandated under her to do, but haven't gone through the whole process of vetting and all that kind of stuff. So that is very difficult. And clerks are going to be overwhelmed. I ask everybody, as a former clerk myself, just try to be nice to your local clerk, Democrat or Republican, because they are under a huge amount of stress.
I would imagine that it is. We want to thank you very much, Susy. It's been a delight having you here today. We've learned a lot about your career and your insights into politics, especially being the chair of the Republican Party, and you've had a remarkable career that still continues to this very day. And we know that you're frequently sought after in the news at all levels, national, state, and local, to comment on political affairs. And we look forward to having you on our podcast again and seeing you on a regular basis in the news. So, Bill, I'll let you have the final word.
Thank you, Susy. It was wonderful. And let's cross our fingers. I'm hoping for a clear decision in November.
Okay, but what I'm going to say is I want to thank you guys. There are not very many podcasts out there that are bipartisan, listen to both sides of the aisle, and ask questions that only the person who's sitting there can answer. In other words, they're not making up an answer themselves. And I project you're going to have a long and successful career with your podcast because you're very careful to make sure that both sides, all sides, are heard from, and you have the background to understand it. So I say thank you.
No.
Thank you very much, Susy. We look forward to seeing you again, and we'll be checking to see what happens very interestingly on election day, and watch for when the outcome is finally decided. So take care and have a good day.
Thanks.